y'all. This is Tracy.
Hey, I'm Reese.
Welcome back to another episode of Haunted Tea Podcast, where we spill the tea about all things paranormal, creepy, and otherworldly. First, I want to say to our listeners, welcome back to another episode with us, and welcome to year 2024. Can't believe it's already here. Hope your winter season's holidays, or whatever you refer to them as, were amazing.
So I want to go ahead and put a disclaimer out right here, right now. Tracy and I have recorded this episode already, and the universe is working against us, so we are now recording a second time. And I'm not recording in my office right now where I usually record because my husband is asleep to go to work tonight. And so I'm here with a toddler. So I can edit out some of the noises that he makes.
Nothing can go wrong.
Nothing can go wrong. There's going to be a little like car disco music in the background. Just let it be ambient. That's where we're at with 2024 so far.
Well, Reese, mine are already grown, so I'm a lucky girl. I'm sitting here next to my flower plant stand with the water trickling in the back, a very peaceful atmosphere. So
you want to trade places? That's what you're saying.
No, I'm just saying I feel like a lucky woman.
Oh, God. Okay. Well, we'll do the best we can for you guys. So if you guys are listening now, chances are you've heard the first couple episodes. You know that Tracy and I have both had our fair share of paranormal experiences over the years. And that's why we're here, is to talk about them and to talk about your experiences too. But mainly to get all our shit off our chest. Everything from Bigfoot to ghosts to the Hat Man to all kinds of crazy shit that we have literally no explanation for. I know in my experience, one of the most constant and consistent experiences that I've had has involved shadow people. They're a breed into themselves. It's an entity that's timeless and universal in all cultures around the world. But what are shadow people? Aren't they just ghosts that are shrouded in darkness? Apparently not. So according to good old Google, in folklore, a ghost is the soul or spirit of a dead person or animal that can appear to the living. Ghosts can appear as invisible presences, translucent shapes, or realistic forms. A shadow person is also known as a shadow figure or a black mass, and they're the perception of a patch of shadow as a living humanoid figure. Believers in the paranormal or supernatural may interpret this as the presence of a spirit or other entity. The appearance of a shadow person can vary slightly, but they are always dark and nearly impossible to see through. I have a toddler climbing on me right now. Some shadow people are more abstract in shape, like a cloud or a tall black mass. Others are much more defined, with a clear head, torso, and limbs. Several folks have even encountered a shadow person wearing a hat, usually depicted as a bowler hat, but the one that I saw that I had called the Walking Man before I knew what he was, wore one of those 1930s like fedora mobster style hats. And actually the Shadow Hat Man, or just the Hat Man, is supposedly the leader of the shadow people. He's more terrifying, more antagonistic, more menacing, more threatening. But the Hat Man himself is going to have a whole other episode all by himself. So what actually is a shadow person? The answer lies somewhere in between we have no fucking clue and multiple theories.
Very scientific.
Very scientific. That's what we're here for, science. Some paranormal experts believe that shadow people are sent to Earth straight from hell. They're demonic in origin. They're fallen angels that traverse the world with unholy agendas, and they're here to do the devil's bidding. Other people think that while they're from the underworld, they may not necessarily have an evil agenda, but that seeing black shadows in the peripheral vision could indicate a break in the fabric between our two lives where the veil has shifted or weakened.
Well, in my personal, very short-lived experience, it was a sense of terror, like absolute terror. The backstory of that is I had bought a set of chimes that I hung on my bedroom wall. I'll put a picture of that in our Patreon and in our resources. But basically within a week of buying or hanging them, I was laying in bed one night and I heard the faintest of tinkling sounds. No, I'm not talking about somebody peeing in the bathroom, but it was a little tinkling sound, like the chimes were moving. And I was thinking in my head, I couldn't even imagine how or why I was hearing them move. I mean, how could they be moving? Mm-hmm. When you guys see the pic, you'll understand my confusion because they lay flat against the wall. Even if there had been a breeze or a fan, which there wasn't, it takes quite a bit to move them without purposely doing so. And I was laying on my right side and the chimes were behind me. So I rolled back a bit and I looked behind me to get a look at them to see if I could actually see the chimes moving. And the biggest sense of fear and dread came over me. I felt like a tiny little girl that wanted her mommy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how bad it was. And I hadn't felt that kind of terror, but only a couple times in my life as a small child. But I rolled back onto my right side and closed my eyes real tightly and literally found myself curled into the fetal position. I was so scared I couldn't even turn on a light or get up. I dared myself to look about 2 more times with my eyes barely open, because they can't tell if you're looking if you have your eyes closed, right?
Right. If you can't see them, they can't see you.
I guess I thought I was fooling whatever was in the room into thinking I couldn't see them. I don't know. But the 2 times I looked again, I could see a large circular shadow just hovering over the chimes and realized that was making them move and do the tinkling sounds ever so slightly. And I laid there for probably 15 minutes at most, but I'm telling you, it felt like hours.
Yeah.
Eventually, that dread, that oppressive feeling, it went away and I was able to fade off to sleep. But still, I was too spooked to get up or turn on a light. Our listeners learned in the first episode about my 14-year-old son, Drake, who took his own life using a belt and the hanging rod in his closet. If y'all didn't listen to that episode, you really probably should. Y'all may not know that these chimes are the same set of chimes that I had packed in my storage shed in Arizona when I left my then husband until I hired movers to bring all our things to Ohio in the house that we were living in when Drake took his life. And when the movers arrived, those chimes were in there, and they arrived in April. When I look back, in hindsight, that's around the same time I began feeling the dread and fear over something horrible happening. Like, I never would have dreamed that Drake would take his life, but it's about that time I started feeling horrible feelings, like we needed to move away from Ohio. And those are those same chimes that hung in the living room of our house in Ohio until Drake took his life in August. I look back and I'm like, some of those signs that I talk about in the first episode, mixed with these chimes and the feeling of dread, there's several things I would have done differently.
Listen, there was no real right or wrong way to handle this with the information that you had at the time. In circumstances like these where you lose a human child, there's always going to be that coulda, shoulda, woulda that's going to torment you in the back of your mind forever. But you made the decisions that you needed to with the information that you had at the time. There was no definitive, clear answer there that told you that any of this could have been related.
Well, I think that too, and that's probably the only reason I'm still here today, because I had a hard enough time forgiving myself, and I still struggle with some survivor's guilt. But irregardless of my personal experiences, there's a lot of others in almost every culture, and they've had their own experiences. In Mesopotamian views, the shadow person was loosely described as a demon or daemon, as first described by the Greeks. Pre-Christian times saw demons much differently than how they're seen today, though. I don't know if you know that. But in Mesopotamian times, they weren't all classified together like, okay, they're just all evil. Demons are just evil. Or saying, they all come from the underworld, so they're all bad. Basically, they were thought of as spirits, like a middleman between humans and the gods and goddesses. Plato actually saw them as potential causes and bringers of good and trouble, with only some seen as pure evil. You could liken it to maybe like gray magic, neither good nor bad necessarily, but definitely capable of both. While more powerful than humans, they can, like humans, choose. Like us. They can choose to do good or evil deeds when crossing over between the different realms and existing form within the different realms. The Sumerian classification for these spirits was the Udug. There was also a class of demons known as the Utuku, and they were what was known as jinn. What we know as the cute little genie in a bottle, those tales of rubbing a lamp and a dark, shadowy figure suddenly spewing forth to become a solid figure that grants you 3 wishes, those started out from the original stories and experiences from people concerning the jinn. And Islamic myths refer to a group of supernatural figures or a specific one as the jinn. So just like the Udug in pre-Christian thought, jinn can be malevolent or benevolent. They're all predominantly known as being tricksters, and us humans having to watch our words carefully when dealing with them. So in many drawings and pictures, they're shown as dark, clawed, shadowy figures that can turn invisible or with the ability to shapeshift, but they're never portrayed as invincible. And I think that's an important thing to think about because it means that they can be bested. They can be beat.
Mm-hmm.
Not only could they be blamed as the reason for disease and sickness in the Bible, in the story of Solomon, they were spirits of nature. And Solomon could communicate with animals and spirits, which allowed him to command the jinn to build the first temple in Jerusalem, which I find fascinating. I mean, he was out there cracking the whip on these jinn, helping to build the temple of Jerusalem.
That's a beast right there.
Even King Solomon's obsession, the Queen of Sheba, she was rumored to be half jinn. I guess that came in real handy.
One way to control the population.
No kidding. In the Quran, jinn are written about more than 24 times. If I remember correctly, they're written about like 29 times. Mm-hmm. Most of that is in the 72nd chapter entitled Al-Jinn. That's A-L space D-J-I-N-N. Al-Jinn, otherwise known as the jinn. Mm-hmm. And they exist between two realms of our world and the spectral. And they're said to have been formed from a smokeless fire. In my mind's eye, I already can compare shadow people to this hazy, black, smokeless fire when they appear. And they're said to have existed before humans were even in existence.
That is probably the best description of a jinn or a shadow person that I have ever heard in my life, is the smokeless fire.
Right. When I had my experience with that shadow circle, mm-hmm. I kept trying to figure out how I could explain it because it wasn't just like a black circle cut out of construction paper. Mm-hmm. It waved and it moved.
Yeah.
And when I hear black smokeless fire, that's what it reminded me of, only like in horizontal waves instead of vertical. Mm-hmm. I then got really invested in finding out more, and I started doing some research and some thinking from a lady. Her name's Rosemary Ellen Guiley. And that's another link I'm going to provide for you guys that are listening so that you can go watch that interview. It's fascinating to me. But she directly states that she believes that shadow people are the jinn. And if you've never heard of her and you're interested, obviously you must be, or you wouldn't be here, in paranormal, supernatural, and otherworldly experiences, y'all really need to look up and do some research on this woman. She had a lot to offer in regards to validation, information, research on these subjects, and a lot more. Mm-hmm. But if you're more specifically interested in the jinn, she wrote a book entitled The Jinn Connection. In that book, she discussed the Nephilim and the Watchers. The Nephilim are the offspring of the Watchers, otherwise known as the quote-unquote sons of God. In Genesis, there's a reference to the Watchers that says they were sexually interested in human women, like some reports that stating that people that have dealt with shadow people, that those shadow people sometimes take a sexual interest in those they visit. Think incubus, the male form of the female succubus.
Yeah.
But in trade for their sexual interactions, they would share, the Nephilim would share their magical secret arts with the humans the average human was not privy to. So this was what part of made God angry and caused him to start the flood in order to cleanse the impurities out of mankind. Essentially, he cast a big watery do-over onto our world, another reference to the Christian creation story.
Yep.
For further reading, though, you guys should check out the Sumerian and Babylonian creation stories. They're very similar, but also quite distinct and different in those playing their parts. At any rate, this, in my opinion, is directly relatable to those claiming to have had sexual encounters with entities, demons, and shadow people. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, Rosemary died on July 18th, just 10 days after she turned 69 in 2019. She was an intuitive watery sign of Cancer. Her writings and research are in-depth and qualitative research case studies. They're numerous, covering ufology, the paranormal, supernatural, other topics. And she had decades of experience as a journalist in the field. After getting a lot of contact from people concerning shadow people and their terrifying visitations, she said that a lot of them reported that these shadow people were wearing a cape or coat and often wearing a hat. Mm-hmm. In 2004, she decided she was going to seriously start studying shadow people. And after she said, quote unquote, intense investigation, she concluded that the shadow people really are indeed the jinn. And something else was interesting. She said that the people contacting her about the visitations always asked at least these two questions. What do they want? And how do I make it go away?
Yeah.
And she stated there's definitive types of shadow people, but in general, like near-death experiences and most people experiencing seeing a tunnel in light, there's a core experience when it comes to visitations by shadow people. She described this core experience as a bedroom invasion. And this is where someone wakes up in the middle of the night to find a person or a very dark silhouette of what looks like a person in their doorway or by their bed. And usually it's a man, or what appears to be a man, 6 to 7 foot tall, wearing a cape or coat and a hat. No features, sometimes eyes are seen, and they radiate a sense of malevolence, making the person feel as if they're going to be attacked. Sometimes the entity simply observes, which is terrifying all by itself, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But others report that the entity actually attacks that person in bed, attempting to choke or suffocate them. Let me just say, in my experience, I feel as if I had given direct attention to that shadowy circle floating on the wall behind me. If I had not turned back over and ignored it after checking it out a couple times, I think it would have done something terrible. I really do. I feel like something else would have happened. Mm-hmm. I know it sounds silly to be afraid of a hovering shadowy circle, but that's the sort of violent and malevolent energy it gave off to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rosemary goes on to say that of those attacked, they would physically feel as if a strong, muscular man was attacking them, and there was nothing they could do about it, and that at any moment, these shadow people could stop the attack and simply disappear through walls, windows, under beds. They could ignore the laws of physics. Mm-hmm. She also brought up a question of, she thought to herself, why are they wearing hats? They're usually weird looking and out of fashion, too. The hats she was talking about. Yeah. And she wondered, why? So she came up with 2 conclusions. She said these entities are intelligent, and they've figured out wearing a hat, it makes their silhouette look more authoritative and more terrifying if they wear a hat. Then she talked about how shape-shifting can be taxing. It can be difficult for them. And so sometimes mimicking the actual shape of a human's head, well, we already know they won't do the features of the face. Mm-hmm. So she surmises or theorizes that they don't want to appear as some malevolent potato head. Like sometimes their heads will look like potato heads without a hat. So how terrifying can that be,
A new fear unlocked.
Right? So she theorizes they just throw on a hat. They don't want to be embarrassed, I guess. She also noticed that a disproportionate amount of those that receive shadow people or jinn visitations also would regularly, voluntarily offer the information that they believe they've been abducted by aliens. Now, I don't personally have any memories of ever being abducted by an alien, so I can't say I can relate to that particular aspect of things. So I don't know where we would go with that. But believe me, if anyone listening has actually had an alien abduction or, of course, your visits by shadow people, we want to hear about them. Share your experiences, please.
For as hard as it is to get people to open up and talk about their paranormal experiences, it seems like it's even harder to get people to open up about any type of alien encounter or abduction or even a sighting based on how people feel like they're going to be judged or they feel like they're going to not be taken seriously.
Yeah, you think about the terror that people describe when they talk about abductions. A lot of them, you hear them, they're frozen in place, they're terrified. And when I hear about those reports, it reminds me of what I felt. But Rosemary went on to state that what the jinn really want are your waves of energy that flow off of you when you're terrified. Mm-hmm. She states that kind of energy is immense, and the jinn are simply using the alien abduction narrative as a way to terrify us.
And then to feed.
Now, I'm not sure if this is related, but I just remembered an event that happened to me when I was a very small child. I don't know, I was probably around 4 or 5, and I was laying at the foot of my bed. And I had one of those tall chest of drawers, and the chest of drawers was a lot taller than me, and they were scooted up so close to the end of my bed that with my butt at the foot of the bed, I could lift my little legs to put my feet up on them, on the drawers. Yeah. And I couldn't sleep that night. As usual, it was some obnoxious hour early in the dark morning. I spent a lot of my childhood roaming in the dark, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning for some strange reason. But I put my little feet up on the chest of drawers, and I saw what looked like, I had looked up like one more drawer higher, and I saw these long, there was no light, but I'm sure there was some sort of light coming in from a window or something, I don't know, but these long, skinny, plastic-looking type legs things, and they were kind of moving. Mm-hmm. And I was fascinated by them at first. They were shiny and they were moving a little bit, and they looked like long horse legs. They were dangling and swinging right above mine. And I looked up even further to the top of the chest of drawers, and I saw what looked like the most classic looking form of a red devil that a kid could cook up in their mind. And he had a long, pointy, thin face. He had an evil, grinning smile, but his tongue was sticking out at the same time. And he had horns, and he was literally holding a pitchfork. But he looked down and he started grinning wider and shaking his head and tongue, and it scared the shit out of me. When I look back and I remember this as an adult, it was like a thin man had put on a red latex suit with horns and hooves of the most common and obvious form of what a devil might look like in my mind's eye, but of course at that age. But I keep thinking just how much exposure and experience could I have had as a little girl thinking about and knowing what an actual devil looked like.
Yeah, well, you would have seen it in cartoons, advertisements, things like that, but that would be something that they could use to scare you a lot better than a black circle would at that time.
Right, because at that age, who would be scared of a black circle? I mean, most of my fear came from a feeling, not from seeing the black circle, but still.
Yeah, I mean, would you even know to have that fear at that age? You're more curiosity than anything, but we're taught from very young age the devil is bad. The Christian devil is bad. So when you're that age and you're that impressionable, something like that is going to be absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. And something keeps coming to my head. When I was little, there used to be this little can wrapped in white paper, and I think it was called Red Devil Potted Meat. Now, I'm telling you, I was raised in, Birmingham, Alabama, and there were times that my mother would drink the juice out of a can of beans and let me have the beans. Okay, we were not raised very privileged.
Right.
And for some reason, that can of potted meat with the little red devil on it is coming to mind, and I'm wondering if that's what influenced what a devil would look like to me.
Definitely could.
But as I think about it now, it was most likely a visit from the jinn. I mean, they're such excellent shapeshifters that they've also been seen alongside aliens and reptilian people wearing hats, by the way. When you say it out loud, it seems silly, but these stories and recollections, they're in every civilization, every time frame, every age, every culture, and every holy book that's out there.
Yeah.
And Rosemary provides more information that others have seen them as snakes. And that, of course, that makes me think of the snake in the Garden of Eden and the Christian creation story from the Bible. But the link provided for that interview, like I said, it's fascinating, and y'all really should go watch it. But shifting gears a bit, in Sumerian times, Alu was known as a vindictive and vengeful member of the Udug, otherwise known as a demon that dives deep into Kur, K-U-R. And Kur was their version of an afterworld that lay beneath us and was, quote-unquote, a dark, dreary cavern located deep below the ground where inhabitants were believed to continue a transpositional version of life on Earth. And they believed that the only food and drink they had was dry dust. But if your family members cared enough about you, they would pour sacred mineral offerings from the earth for you to drink. And in this underworld afterworld, it was initially believed there was no final judgment of the deceased, and the dead were neither punished nor rewarded for their deeds in life.
I don't know about that, but that sounds like hell. That sounds like a punishment, not just an ambivalent type of afterlife.
Yeah, or like a purgatory. Nalu was described as having no mouth, lips, or ears, and there's no gender assigned. Isn't that interesting? Again, with the no features, and you can't quite tell if it's male or female.
Yeah.
But Stephen Herbert Langdon, around the 1860s to 70s, he cited a translation of a cuneiform script, and it goes like this. Whom in his bed the wicked Alu covered, whom the wicked ghost by night overwhelmed. And Langdon further stated that, as described earlier, Alu is androgynous and also attacks a man's breast.
Sounds to me like he's going for the heart.
Who's this Langdon guy, and why do we care what he might have to say about Alu anyway? Well, he was an Assyriologist. And those of you listening might be wondering, what the hell is an Assyriologist? It's a person that takes on the archaeological, anthropological, historical, and linguistic study of the cultures that used cuneiform as a form of writing. And you may be even further wondering, what the hell is cuneiform writing? Well, it's the earliest known system of writing, and it was developed to write the Sumerian language. See how this all ties in together?
Isn't that when they did like they took the sticks and they made the lines in the clay? Isn't that cuneiform?
Right. Egyptian writing is considered hieroglyphic.
Mm-hmm.
So cuneiform is a little more simplistic, but it's a lot of times what you think of when you hear about cuneiform writing is the Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking like the straight lines pressed in clay, that they had a more simplified alphabet, they had a more simplified numerical system.
Right, and where it was preserved in clay tablets.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And it's weird because in a lot of these instances, you're talking about them being androgynous. They're talking about not necessarily there being a punishment or a reward for the time spent in life on Earth. But in a lot of instances, it's believed that seeing a shadow person or a jinn can be a bad omen, or it could even indicate a person's impending death. But I don't know that I personally believe that one, because there's so many thousands of reports of people being tormented by shadow people for years and years and years, myself included, yourself included. And I don't see how every person that's been tormented by a shadow person that's going to relate to their impending death.
Right. But now, if you focus, I mean, your point's valid in my eyes, but when you say people have been tormented by shadow people without death, I mean, you could be exactly right. Who's to say your visits from shadow people weren't a bad omen of upcoming doom and the trauma and trials that, we've both experienced in life?
Mm-hmm.
Langdon went on to quote other passages, what members of the Udug, like Alu, might have been up to, and the passages translated as such. The Udug and the Utuku slays man alive on the plain. The wicked Alu who covers man like a garment. And this reminds me even more of the reports from those dealing with shadow people when they have that heaviness on their chest and their inability to move or breathe, the feeling of smothering and so on.
Yeah.
That reminds me of that. Mm-hmm. But to further continue, they have come nigh unto a suffering man on the outside. They have brought about a painful malady in his body. The curse of evil hath come into his body. An evil goblin they have placed in his body. An evil bane has come into his body. Evil poison they have placed in his body. An evil malediction has come into his parts. Evil and trouble they have placed in his body. Poison and taint have come into his body. And they have produced evil. Evil being, evil face, evil mouth, evil tongue, sorcery, venom, slaver, wicked machinations which are produced in the body of the sick man. O woe for the sick man whom they cause to moan like a Saharat. And this, I have a friend, her name's Kim, and the simple explanation is she can see and speak with dead people. Mm-hmm. I guess most people would refer to her as a medium. And she was telling me that when you're dealing with demons, jinn, that sort of thing, they can put a sickness in your body. And the year that Drake died was a very rough year. I divorced my husband of 23 years. I became homeless after we lost Drake. I was diagnosed with cancer, type 3 ovarian and uterine. And one of the things that she brought up was, Tracy, are you aware that it's very possible that whatever was working on Drake could have been working on you too? Mm-hmm. It could have been making you sick. And I'm thinking, well, isn't that coincidental? I mean, that's scary to think about.
Absolutely. Well, and not just the physical manifestations of things like cancer or, congenital sicknesses that start to rear their heads, but mental illness as well. It could be a sickness of the mind causing people to have increased depression, anxiety, agoraphobia, things that otherwise might be able to be maintained without that influence.
Well, and here at Tonity, we both, one of the things that we strive for is to make sure that people with mental health issues that have experienced these sorts of events or encounters, there's no shame in that, because in my personal opinion, and I think yours too, some of these quote unquote mental health illnesses used to be what people had when they were considered to be oracles, and where people would take long treks and go to sit at the feet of these people with these supposed mental health illnesses.
Yeah.
So I don't want our listeners to think that you're crazy for having these experiences, or that we're somehow saying, well, these things will just make you crazy.
Mhm.
Sometimes, like you said, Reese, it could increase the problem, and it makes it easier for other people that don't believe to dismiss the experiences that are being had by so many people in this world.
Absolutely. I always wondered if maybe one reason that I'm more prone to having these experiences is because I've had untreated bipolar, untreated ADHD, untreated addiction for so many years that it was just like a magnet for everything to kind of flock to me, and nobody would believe me. Now that I'm sober, I get a little bit more validity with what I'm seeing and what I'm telling people that I'm seeing, but there's still that level of doubt that's just like, yeah, you're just crazy.
Yeah, maybe you're on dope. You're crazy.
Yeah. So there's scientific explanations for shadow people, Jen, and they theorize that shadow people are actual literal people. I don't know how this is more scientific, but they say that they could be time travelers, perhaps visiting from the future. And this could possibly explain why the figures look so human like in form, and the nature in which they're manipulating the time space continuum to travel could prevent them from fully materializing. Not entirely sure that I believe this theory, but there's also mathematicians and string theorists that believe that there's at least 10 dimensions, possibly as many as 26. And they have suggested that shadow people are actually visitors from one of those alternate dimensions, perhaps crossed over or stuck here from their quote unquote home. I guess that's possible, but I don't think that it explains their sometimes sinister natures or that feeling of absolute dread that you can get when you encounter them.
Right. Can you imagine? Maybe they're just really pissed off because they think that we're screwing up the world.
Yeah, or they're pissed off because they want to get home and nobody believes what they're seeing. There's a lesser popular theory out there stating that shadow people are some sort of guardian or spirit guide that's been entrusted to watch over specific people. I didn't used to think that was the truth, but based on what we've learned about shadow people in this research and my experiences, I do think that that could be plausible. There's a feeling that you get when you encounter these guys. Sometimes it's that absolute dread and you feel them, you know they're there before you see them. And sometimes there's just a neutral feeling, like once you get over the shock of seeing something, then you don't feel anything. And then sometimes you see them and there's that initial shock, and then you get that feeling that they're a watcher or protector. And that's what I've run into in the past.
Hmm.
Don't have like that very ominous vibe. In a lot of cases where they've been cited, there's a very ominous vibe that they exhibit that doesn't really portray like I'm your friend, I'm here to protect you.
Yeah, talk about a frenemy.
Exactly, exactly. Like, they can be telling you I'm your friend, but the vibe that they're giving off is completely different. And so it's hard to say, because while not every single shadow person encounter is completely terrifying or gives that like I'm from the depths of hell sensation, there's been enough recorded encounters to lend that their presence is not necessarily one that gives a feeling of safety or security, but those encounters are out there. They've been recorded. I know that my own personal experiences have ranged from paralyzingly horrifying to a feeling that they're just kind of curious onlookers peeking around corners to see what's going on in the house. That's kind of what I'm starting to think that Alexander, which we talked about in our last episode, was. But there's also been reportings that they don't really communicate too much as far as shadow people.
Yeah, they don't really interact that much.
But with Jen, there are so many recordings of investigations where they've gotten EVPs, they've had things thrown at them, they've been shoved, they've been scratched. And these are known Jen investigations that they're doing. So there's definitely some level of communication there. So Jen and Shadow people, I feel like they're in the same category, but there may be like different variations of them. Like, 'cause the Jen could be the more evil side of things that are, throwing things and pushing people, scratching people, acting more demonic, where some of the other shadow people are just simply the watchers or hanging out, seeing what's going on. So maybe there's also different categories where some are more known to communicate than others are. There's been times that if there's an obviously evil presence hanging over the place, then seeing a shadow person lurking in a corner might make your stomach clench like you're going to shit yourself. But if it's a haunted space where you have a known friendly entity, a known positive energy there, then the shadow person that you see might be felt as more of an ambivalent being that means no harm, or maybe that's when you feel the watcher or the guardian type sensation.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me because, like we covered in episode 1, Drake took his life in the house with the chimes hanging, but at the same time, at least 2 other children took their lives in that house the same way Drake did, but the chimes weren't there at that time. I still feel like the chimes and the shadow had something to do with influencing him. I like they double teamed him or something. Had that shadow given me good feelings and the spirits in that house had been positive,
Mhm.
I believe Drake would still be alive today. But it's difficult reconciling and combining the 2 different types of influence working on him
Mhm.
when I know the chimes and the shadow I experienced weren't there when the 2 others took their lives in the house in Ohio.
I do wonder that with the arrival of the chimes and the negative entity that seems to be attached to that, going into a home that already had suicides, that already had negative things there, I wonder if bringing those chimes in there, it fed off of that negative energy that was already there.
Right. Like it double amped it up.
Yeah, yeah. Became stronger, more powerful, more able to influence. I mean, enough to make you sick too.
Yeah, it wasn't something that I realized at the time or thought about. Literally, it's been years, and it was just a few weeks ago when I was talking to my friend Kim that brought up, it's very possible that they were working on me and making me sick, whatever it was.
Yeah, well, you were a positive influence in that house, and you could have stopped the progression of more of that negative energy had you known. So they had to take you out in order to accomplish what they set out to accomplish. They had to weaken you in some way.
So many unanswered questions.
So skeptics always have something to say, and they like to blame shadow people sightings on sleep paralysis. And eventually we'll do an entire episode on that topic. But for those who are unfamiliar, sleep paralysis is defined as a temporary inability to move while falling asleep or upon waking. Those of you who don't know much about sleep cycles and circadian rhythms, you're going to get a crash course. Okay, so it said that it takes the average person about 7 minutes to fall asleep.
Yeah, not my partner. He falls like I'm a really lucky woman. I know I am. In order for him to get to sleep, he likes to stroke my hair and rub my head. And I kid you not, there are times that he will just stroke my head or rub my hair like 3 times, and the next thing I hear is, and he is already asleep. I don't know how the man does it.
See, I can do that, and it's Nick that's up all hours of the night and tossing and turning and everything else. So when I was reading this passage to him, because I thought the research was interesting, he was like, "What average person goes to sleep in 7 minutes?" I was like, "Dude, it's science. I don't know.
It happens. I swear it happens.
Happens to other people, just not you, honey." So during that time period, whether it takes you 7 minutes or 3 hours of falling asleep, that's when you're going to be more likely to get the sensation that you're falling. And I know you've had this experience before. You're not quite awake, you're not quite asleep, you're kind of like in that drifting stage. And sometimes falling asleep can lend to the physical sensation that you're actually falling. And that's when you jolt yourself back awake. Sometimes you've got your hands in front of you to stop yourself in the fall. So that's like the falling asleep stage at the very end, at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, there's a couple different cycles which encompass the light sleep stage and then the deep sleep stage. And then there's the REM sleep stage, which most people are familiar with. That's when you're more likely to remember your dreams. It's the active dreaming stage. And then after that REM stage, your brain starts to wake back up again. I had a college psychology professor that explained that that's a throwback from the caveman days when it was dangerous for someone to sleep in a deep sleep for long periods of time because they had to keep an ear out for predators, keep an eye on the fire. So after this REM and dreaming stage, there's like 10 to 20 minutes where your mind kind of wakes up to listen for any signs of danger. And if everything's all good, you fall back asleep, none the wiser to your body's behaviors.
Right. You know what this makes me think of? During like Victorian Western times, people were known that they'd go to bed with the dark, and then we would get up anywhere between, say, 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning. You'd light a candle, you'd be up wandering the house, doing things. And you would spend a couple hours being awake, and then you would go back to sleep. And it leads me to think about that, and also how that correlates with it being the witching hour. And that's a lot of our times when we experience or report that we're having these encounters with shadow people or our deceased loved ones, ghosts, all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. It's that 3 a.m. hour.
I guess it just goes with the whole sleep cycle.
Mm-hmm. So the whole sleep cycle with all of these different phases lasts an average of 70 to 120 minutes. Most people have 4 to 6 sleep cycles per night. So it would lend to think that if somebody's going to bed with the chickens at 6 p.m., 3 sleep cycles, that would get you up about 3 o'clock in the morning. You'd putter around, do your thing. That's when you're more likely to experience. In haunted houses, a lot of times that's when you start hearing footsteps through the house and toys going off, things moving around.
Yeah, and it leads you to wonder, are we creating that ourselves at that time period? Or, in my opinion, more likely, these entities know whatever they are, deceased loved ones, ghosts, jinn, demons, shadow people, whatever. Do they know that that would be the right time to be making themselves known and contacting us? Or is it just a natural occurrence of our world and physics and all of that?
That's interesting. I don't have an answer for that. I'm wondering if they know that we're waking up from those sleep cycles and they're able to time it. My psychology professor had also taught us this thing where you could train yourself to wake up at a specific time, feeling rested by using your own personal sleep cycle. And I was never able to do it, but if you time when you go to sleep or if you time when you want to wake up, you count backwards by like however long your sleep cycle is. So if it's 120 minutes, you count back, okay, I want to wake up at 6 a.m. So I need to go back 2 hours and go to bed at 4 a.m. and I'll still wake up feeling rested, even though it's only like 2 hours of sleep. So if these things are that tapped into our psyche and our sleep cycles, they may be able to know like, okay, well, they went to bed at this time, their sleep cycle is this long, so they're going to start waking up in that wake up stage at 2:45 a.m. So I'm going to start stomping around the house at 2:46 a.m. I'm going to get their attention.
Right? This is the best time for me to make my appearance.
Yeah. What better way to terrify somebody than when they're coming out of a sleep, still half dreaming, their body's paralyzed? Hey, it's time to fuck with them. And so what they say is that those two periods, the falling asleep and the waking up cycles, they say that's when sleep paralysis is most likely to occur. And it's because your brain is like wide awake and listening, your ears are listening, but your body is still dead ass asleep. You're paralyzed. So sleep paralysis is the phenomenon where your brain's awake, so you're awake, but your body hasn't gotten the message yet and it's still completely asleep. So you're paralyzed, you can't move, you can't speak. In some cases, like it's accompanied by hallucinations because you're still coming out of that REM cycle. You might see little spiders crawling out of wall sockets and they could be hallucinations. But skeptics are saying that all shadow people, all Hatman sightings are hallucinations during sleep paralysis. And for the sake of science, we can say that at least a few of them are actual hallucinations coming out of that sleep cycle. But more than half the population of Earth has reported to have at least one instance of sleep paralysis. Not every single one of those instances is going to be just a hallucination. There's no possible way. And people that are prone to sleep paralysis know when they're having sleep paralysis. So I do feel that they might be using the knowledge that we're in that vulnerable state, and that's when they're going to come stand just outside of the peripheral vision. You can move your eyes, but you can't move your head to see what's in your peripheral. And that could be when they're crawling on top of the person, sitting on their chest, making them feel like they can't breathe. They're taking advantage of that. So I don't think that sleep paralysis really has anything to do. It might be able to account for like 5% of all of the shadow people sightings in sleep paralysis, but the other 95% I think is very likely legitimate. And a lot of these shadow person sightings, a lot of these experiences, these people aren't asleep at all. You weren't asleep. I don't think I've ever been asleep and woken up to something like that, except for, loud slams and things that I couldn't see. But And what I've seen, I have been wide awake, walking around, laying in bed on my phone. There's no waking up out of anything
Yeah,
when this happens.
right. And that's the way it was with me. I was not asleep. I was lying in bed, but I was not asleep.
Mhm.
And I don't just think I was awake. I know I was awake. But, and that reminds me in that interview with Rosemary, you guys really got to go watch it. Have I said that enough? She was talking about how intelligent the shadow people or the jinn are.
Mhm.
They know that humans have the sleep paralysis as a natural part of their biology, and she thinks that they're using it to their advantage to terrorize the humans. So, I mean, we feel the same way she does,
Yeah.
and they do it so that they can feed off the person's heightened and activated energy,
Hmm.
like an energy vampire.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of this or if you know this, and it's pretty sad and really kind of horrific. But in some Asian countries where they eat, insects or they're eating cats and dogs,
Hmm.
you see some of these horrific videos where they take a blowtorch, or to snakes as well. They take a blowtorch to these poor animals and they traumatize them and they torture them. And people wonder why, and their answer is that the meat tastes better
Yeah.
when their adrenaline is going right before they die. And so that's why they find the reason that it's okay to torture these poor animals. And I just, every time I think about these jinn scaring the shit out of people that have had experiences with them,
Hmm.
does our meat taste better after they torture us?
I it's interesting you say that. I don't agree with it in any way, shape, or form, but working in vet med my entire life, when you bring a cat in for
Mm-hmm.
blood work and that cat is absolutely terrified, it's been shoved into a crate, put in a car, driven to the clinic, walking into a clinic with, all these sights and smells and everything scary. If you're pulling a regular, even just a regular pre-surgical blood panel, that glucose level is going to be off the charts because of the adrenaline and because of the fear.
Right.
So I do wonder if it elevates, our blood sugar enough to where like they might
Does the meat taste better?
yeah, like a caffeine jolt for them almost. Like, you've got that extra level of fear. So it's not only that, but it's like the jolt
Yeah,
from
that's
cola.
interesting to think about.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's awful though. We talked in the last episode that I think that there might be a portal here, and we talked about our friend Alexander that I thought was a spirit. Now that we've done the shadow people research, I'm kind of starting to question whether or not he was an actual ghost versus an intelligent, communicative shadow person.
The experiences you're talking about, just how asleep were you?
Wide awake, literally wide awake. But when I saw the one outside, it was 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning when that happened. And I was wide awake walking around. I didn't think at the time that that was a shadow person experience, but now I'm really thinking that I am because there was a cloak involved. I don't think that I've ever had an experience where I could even think that I was asleep. Everything has been wide awake, usually walking
Right.
around or, at least wide awake sitting up in bed watching something on my phone or whatever. So I don't this is out of hundreds of encounters, not just, one or two, but a lifetime worth of encounters. And what about the person that's wide awake on their couch watching a movie, sitting up eating popcorn when they see something pass through their kitchen out of their peripheral, or the person who's driving and
Right.
see shadow people dart behind a tree? Like those people aren't asleep. There's no sleep paralysis going on. And that's not to say that the kid sitting upright in bed that's staring in terror at the lanky black figure in the corner isn't causing them to be paralyzed with fear, but they're still not sleeping. Some people feel
Right.
rather than see the shadow person glaring at them from the depths of darkness.
Like
You
me.
did, yeah. And they might think that they saw something kind of gliding by in the corner of their eye, but when they look, nothing's there. But they know that presence is there just from how they feel. So we've gone into a very brief, very general description of shadow people. There's a couple similarities that seem to be kind of across the board with all of them. I do think that Jinn and shadow people are related. I think they're cousins, but then I think that there's a separate category of shadow people as shadow people, and Jinn might be in like the more evil part of that category. But there are some commonalities that are generally noted, and I've personally observed a lot of these as well. It's said that shadow people are a shape generally seen or felt as being male, which is interesting because you mentioned earlier that they're known to be more androgynous. They definitely seem to have an intelligence and be aware of us, and they react to our observing them. They say the typical shadow person is tall, ranging from 6 to 7 foot. I've seen some that were much smaller and some that were much, much more taller, or I don't know about taller, but like more elongated, like the arms, legs, everything, the torso was all more elongated. They often seem to be wrapped in a cloak. They may or may not be wearing a hat. Like I said earlier, typically a bowler hat, but that can vary. And I've seen differences in that as well. Their appearance has like a depth or a substance to it. You see the shadow, but it's thicker than a shadow. It's darker than the shadow. It's blacker than a pitch black room. Like
Right.
they don't generally have visible eyes. Some have been said to have glowing red eyes. They're rarely ever reported to have spoken or tried to communicate. But now I'm kind of wondering if what we have dealt with in here with our friendly guy could have been a shadow person. And he was very communicative. Physical objects don't seem to matter to them. They can walk through walls, they can glide through doors and things like that.
Law of the physics.
Yeah, yeah, they don't apply. And then they're known to either having a very benign, non-threatening demeanor, or else they bring feelings of foreboding or demonic energy, and it doesn't really seem like there's much of an in between.
Right. I honestly think that shadow people or jinn, they're just different words from different cultures, except for then you think, okay, shadow people don't tend to shape shift. However, if shadow people are jinn, jinn do shape shift. To me, I believe that the label of jinn, or whatever you want to call them, sunflowers and daisies, I think that you could apply this one label or term and lump the jinn and the shadow people in together.
Yeah, I agree. I think jinn are a type of shadow people all on their own. I just think that they're more on the negative side of things.
Right. I'm asking our listeners, what do you guys think? Do you think that they're the same, or do you think they're different?
I want to know if people have had good experiences with floating black masses like what you've seen and not felt that feeling of complete and utter dread.
Right.
So motivations of shadow people are so unknown. Like we don't know shit about these guys. I've seen shadow people that were running across my back fence and it just felt very menacing, almost like they were taunting me. And I had things that were going on in that house at the time that were just downright terrifying.
Like they wanted you to chase them or just see them?
Almost like they knew that I was going to kind of catch them out the corner of the window. I was terrified to go in that backyard. I was terrified. And it was almost like a parade of them just going back and forth and back and forth. And those were the really elongated ones that I would see. And it was just like they were saying, I dare you to step outside. And there was something else that was in that backyard too that just scared the ever loving shit out of me. And I don't know if that was a shadow person or a creature. But suffice to say, I wound up getting blackout curtains for every window of that house that faced that backyard because I was so scared. It was just, it was a bad time. There was a lot of bad stuff going on.
You're like, no, truth or dare ain't gonna happen up in this house.
No, that was the house where I locked everything into the master bedroom and I didn't leave that bedroom after dark. I was begging anybody that would listen to come stay with me because I was afraid to be there by myself. And there was so much happening, but it was I didn't see the shadow people inside. There was other things that we saw inside, but they were definitely outside. And it was just that feeling that if you come out here, we're going to hurt you. But then I've got the stuff that's going on in my house now. And I'm constantly seeing shadows peering around corners. And, they have like this one doorway that they like to hang out in. And it's still jarring every time I look out the window and see like, a head peeking around.
Yeah, even the pictures and videos that you have sent me give me an eerie sense.
Yeah, but there's nothing threatening about it. It doesn't feel like there's anything that's negative. It's just like they're watching.
Yeah, nothing scary, but eerie.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that you ever can get used to having sightings like this and not jump every time you see it. But it's once that initial shock is over, whether you've got that feeling of dread or you've got that feeling of they're not going to hurt me. But I will, like the entities in the house, I'll straight up say, like, please don't scare us. Please don't do this today. I don't have the mental bandwidth. I don't have the emotional bandwidth to deal with seeing somebody peek around the corner.
Right.
Please don't do this to me. And for the most part, they won't. It's like they respect that. And they're not trying to scare us, but they acknowledge that they scare the shit out of us. So I don't think that what's going on in here is bad. But I still don't know if what we're seeing in here is spirit or shadow person? Like, is it a dead human or is it something else entirely? So we will never know the motivations. There's been some theories of different categories of shadow people motivations. So we're going to educate you guys a little bit here. There's the category of the lurkers, and that's what I think is probably here in my house right now. They're generally found inside homes. They seem to have a preference for bedrooms.
So basically, these are the perverts of the shadow people.
Yeah, they're the ones that like to stand over you on the bed, but I don't think that these are the ones that are crawling onto you while you're sleeping. I think these guys are just watching.
They're just peeping toms.
Yeah, they're just there. I don't know if they're reporting back to somebody or anything, but sometimes they're known to wander a location, sometimes they're known to stalk somebody, but as soon as they realize that they've been noticed, they're gone. They fucking vanish. They're going around a corner, they're going through a solid wall, they flee. And these guys they don't seem to have any real motivation or intention. They're just hanging out. They're considered the classics because they're the ones that are usually human-shaped shadows. Sometimes they have a hat. More often, they have a cloak or a large coat. And there's a less common, but still considered a classic variation, is just it being a vague figure, more like a human with a cloth over them sort of shape. And that's what I kind of think of, like, the ghost with the person with the sheet over the head. It's like that, but in shadow.
Or like you see now, where somebody throws a raggedy sheet over like a drone and they're flying it around.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about?
That's what I think that they are. Like, they look like, or the vague forms. And they're going around going, ooh.
Right. And they say that encounters with that class of shadow people really is one of the one that instills the big sense of dread or foreboding.
Mm-hmm.
But that could be because as humans, we kind of have an instinctive reaction when we see any kind of unexpected figure in the darkness, regardless of its intentions or what it is that they want or what they're doing. And some people say they've felt a sense of fear or dread coming from the entities themselves. And since I've had a ton of different experiences of varying degrees, I think I can agree with that sentiment.
Same.
Experience with the ones who just observe, it never really occurred to me to consider those as shadow people. I always just kind of called them the watchers, but I don't know what I thought they were otherwise. Mm-hmm. But that class of shadow people is thought to be primarily attached to one particular individual or family, and in some cases it's hereditary because, well, especially in the case of the Hat Man. Mm-hmm. It's said that if a parent saw the Hat Man as a child, there's a high chance that their kid will as well. And unlike hauntings from ghosts, which are usually attached to a particular place or thing, these shadow people have been known to follow their chosen victim to various locations.
That's terrifying, knowing that no matter where you go, you literally cannot get away.
So many of our resources caution that with this class of entity, you got to be extra, extra careful, because even if they seem benign or neutral with their motivations, there's always the possibility they can actually be aggressive or evil, just waiting for the opening. This is why it is so fucking important to keep your space cleansed. And if you ever feel any type of negativity or have shadow people that give you an actual sense of dread or foreboding on the outside of the normal shock of seeing them, sage the fuck out of your space. And if that doesn't work, reach out to a local shaman, coven, even a preacher, but call in an expert to help you feel safe. Okay, you guys, seriously. If you don't know what you're doing, you could make things worse. You could cause all sorts of things to happen. You could be inviting things in when you don't even know it. Mm-hmm. And there's a really, really very, very thin line between evil shadow people and demonic beings and jinn. And it's not worth fucking around waiting to find out. Okay? Don't fuck around and find out. Just don't. Not unless you know what you're doing. Get the shit taken care of before they can do any sort of real damage. And some of the more innocent seeming shadow people can actually be malevolent. Sometimes they're so skilled or so deeply evil. I don't know if you guys can resonate with this, but a lot of times when you hear these stories of Satan or the devil coming after a person or tempting someone, they give you what you want and they make you feel good. They don't just make you feel ambivalent towards them. They literally make you feel good. They give you the things that you want. You think about the jinn that grants you those wishes. You think about the devil that gives you what you want when you sign away your soul in a contract. These are the feelings. These are the kind of events that can happen that will lull you into a false feeling of security.
Absolutely.
And trusting your gut isn't enough to distinguish between the neutral and the want to kill you vibes. So I guess this leads us right into the dangerous or aggressive shadow people. And even if it doesn't seem like it's doing anything more than watching or creeping around in the hallways, there's a very real possibility it could be exhibiting intelligence and giving you a false sense of security, as we just spoke about. And as much as they can give while still in terror, and still instilling terror from just a single glimpse into your peripheral. You got to think, we literally have no idea what these things are, and communicating with them to discover their true motives and intent, that's pretty much impossible. These are beings that could have a much different perspective of time. So years of sightings for me might just be a tiny blip in time for them. You think about the thousands and thousands of years that these guys have been reported as being around. How do we know they're not the same exact beings?
Mm-hmm.
And that they're not different beings? The average lifetime is 70 to 90 years old. 90 is being, really old. That's like an eye blink for them, a sneeze.
Yeah.
I mean, they have the capability for patience that humans can't even imagine. They can visit us and cause us to have a breakdown or a moment of weakness, and then seize the opportunity to pounce on our vulnerabilities within just a few years, a few weeks, a few days. Mm-hmm. In my case, it was within a few months.
Yeah.
Caution, you've got to take it, people. Unless you're like a high witch or very educated and skilled in dealing with the paranormal, or low magic, high magic, for the love of the gods and goddesses, call in someone qualified, especially if you have or live with kids or pets or other people who need protecting.
Absolutely. When it's not just you, it's extra scary if you're living in a house with kids and animals and, vulnerable people, because it's not just you that you have to protect. You have to prevent them from taking advantage of that vulnerability that you're in charge of, and keep them safe as well. And that's a heavy load to bear.
Yeah, as we said earlier, you may not be able to trust your gut instinct when it comes to knowing what these entities are up to, but you trust your gut instinct when something feels off.
Yeah.
Because I have a really hard time, as I mentioned earlier, I still struggle. It's our job to protect, and having daily maintenance protective magic is way smarter and so much more defensive and better to do than waiting until you feel like you should or like you have to.
Right, and they're watching. So if you drop the ball, they're going to zoom in.
Reese, didn't we also talk about shadow figures as omens?
We did.
In my case, some people don't believe that the omens are, like the shadow people are omens, or like they're portents of evil to come. But in my case, I really do feel that there was something attached to those chimes, and that alone was an omen, in addition to all the other things that I experienced as signs that I didn't put together that were discussed in our episode 1. And I know for sure that Drake was feeling something about shadow people being an omen, because when Drake's girlfriend's mother, I was talking to her and I was saying, how bad I felt and how sad it was that Drake had told me he was scared of his closet. And I didn't know why. And then I told her, I said, don't tell Becca that Drake was scared of his closet, because that might have embarrassed him. And, I don't want to embarrass him, especially now that he's gone. And she told me, she goes, Tracy, Becca already told me that Drake told her that he was seeing shadows in his room and in his closet, and that he knew they weren't his shadow. But he didn't want her to tell anyone because he didn't want to look like a wimp.
Right. That happens so often. Like you said, it's hindsight 2020. The more you think back on it, the more you catch, like, I should have known this, I should have seen that. But you really don't when it's happening.
Right.
It's so easy to just kind of blow over certain things. And as a kid, especially, I didn't want to tell people what I was seeing and what I was experiencing, because I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to be that weird kid.
Exactly. And imagine yourself as a 14-year-old boy growing into manhood and, wanting to appear like you're tough and you have it all together with your girlfriend.
Yeah. You can't say I'm afraid of my closet. Like, that's a little kid thing.
Maybe he was a lot more secure than what I gave him credit for when I was worried about Becca knowing that, because he did tell her. So, I don't know. Yeah. The last main class of shadow people are those tied to a location. And we talked about this earlier, Reese, the one that I was thinking about for your place. And several types of shadow people make up that large group, and their motivations can vary depending on the type. In general, though, Those that haunt a location, they tend to be more malevolent and dangerous and all that to encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And they're definitely less likely to haul ass when spotted, and they could decide to attack instead.
Yeah.
According to experts, the least malevolent of this class of shadow people are simply those who are negative in nature. And at the extreme other end of the spectrum are the worst of the shadow people, the demonic shadow creatures. And what they want is usually to express their emotions on us.
Mm-hmm.
For weaker ones, that could be scratches or sick feelings. And for stronger entities, they're capable of full on possessions, throwing objects, shoving people, and pushing people downstairs. So if you decide to investigate an area with a known repeating shadow entity, again, you guys, use extreme caution.
This category scares me. So we're on 5 acres in the mountains. We moved here in October of last year. And because we had livestock that needed to come up, when we bought the place, there was no fencing. So Nick came up the week after we bought it, but the week before we moved the animals up and came up, stayed a day or two, installed the fencing, came back down. Well, when he came to install the fencing, he put some trail cams up just to see what kind of predators were in the area to protect our animals. So we came up on a Thursday, got the animals situated. We do pig rescue. So there's, a bunch of pigs in the pig pen. And I couldn't sleep one night. It was like 2 or 3 days that we'd been here at this point. We didn't have internet connection. There's no cell phone service out here. We didn't have a cell phone that worked here at the time. So it was pretty isolating and couldn't sleep. It's like 2:30 in the morning. And I decided I was going to go out and check on the pigs. Well, a couple days before when we got here, we were looking at the trail cam and there was two images that were caught on one of the cams. I'll have to post those on the Patreon as well because I still to this day don't know what they are, but it was this creature that was up close and personal with the trail cam. And this trail cam was like 6 feet off the ground on a tree trunk facing towards the woods. And so where the pig pen is, we have a sunroom in the back of the house, and there's a door that goes down from the sunroom. And now it's built all the way. We extended the pig pen to where it's all the way to that door. But before I would have to go out the door, go down the steps, and then walk about 25 feet to get to the edge of the pig pen. So to the right of the pig pen, there's, the woods and everything are all behind us. This was in like one of the small cleared spaces on our property. And there's this big game trail entrance. We've got deer and bigger animals. So it's obviously a deer trail that leads out to our creek. And so I'm going out there, can't sleep, grab the bucket and, throw some treats in there. And I'm walking around the side of the pig pen and I'm just dumping treats in and keeping eyes on everybody, making sure everybody's doing okay. And I'm walking along the edge of the fence and I'm dumping treats in. And I get to like almost parallel with where that entrance is for the game trail. And I look down and the pigs aren't following me. And like these are pigs, they follow wherever food goes, it does not matter. And I look down and they stopped about 6 feet back along the fence and they're eating and they're looking, but they're not coming any closer. And I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you guys? Like, there's food down here. What are you doing? So I look up, and as I'm looking around to see, like, maybe there's a bobcat in the area that's freaking them out or a mountain lion. And in the entrance to that game trail, there's a hooded figure standing there. And just standing, just watching. And he had to have been at least 6 feet tall. Couldn't see eyes, couldn't see a face. It looked like somebody in like one of the old like the monk's robes. Like it had the hood on it and the cloak that went all the way down. And I couldn't tell if the head was up or down. I couldn't see a face or anything, so I couldn't really tell the direction of the head. But that feeling of fear that I had was palpable. Like I thought my heart was going to jump out of my chest. And so I threw the rest of the food in the pen and I started backing towards the door, towards the steps to get inside while keeping my eyes on it the whole time. Never moved, never budged, anything like that. So finally, I back all the way up in the house. I back up the steps, get in the sunroom, and I'm looking out the window, and it's still standing there. So I go to get my phone to take a picture. By the time I got my phone out of the room, came back around, take a picture, it was gone. But I've seen him 2 or 3 times since then. And at one point, we had our friend come out and do a paranormal investigation of the woods specifically. And in that exact area, on that same trail where this guy where I saw him when we did an EVP session, we were listening to it later and we said, is there somebody here? And you can hear so clearly, I am. And I never thought to attribute that to a shadow person before. I thought it was some kind of actual spirit, but now I do. I think that it could be a haunting shadow figure. definitely felt evil. And when I have to go out to feed at night, like I have to walk right out there. Usually I'm by myself in the dark. Nick works overnight, so I'm by myself. And it is absolutely terrifying walking out in that area. And at this point, I try not to look in that area, but I can go to the woods like 10 feet on either side of that entrance, and I don't feel that fear at all. It's like that's his place, and as long as we don't mess with it, he won't come at me, but I feel like if I were to go to that spot and try to antagonize something, something bad would happen. And Nick and I have done investigations where we've gone outside, and he wanted to investigate that area, and I was literally in tears begging him not to go. I couldn't think of any other prayer, so I was just doing the Lord's prayer the whole time because I couldn't. And it was like the more I said the Lord's prayer and the more I said all who are evil and mean to do harm must leave and never return, as we're walking towards that area, you could feel an anger and a resentment that it couldn't affect us the way that it wanted to. So I don't know. I don't know what this guy is, but I the more research we do, the more that I feel like this is probably what he is. So we've covered some of the basics. We've done a brief synopsis of what shadow people are and what their possible motivations could be. There's a couple main categories of the various descriptions of shadow people that could be encountered. There seems to be some type of correlation between the type of shadow person, the location, and their intent. But again, there's no real science to this. There's human shaped shadow people. These guys make up the majority of shadow person sightings. They're usually the typical cloaked figure or the hat man, and they can come in a variety of combinations. Like I said, I've seen tons of these guys over the years, and for the most part, I feel like the majority have been pretty non-threatening. Whatever that thing that I saw in the woods definitely did feel threatening. I never thought to attribute him as a shadow person until doing this research, but they seem to just kind of hang out and watch. But it's said that while these guys don't seem to have pure evil intentions, they are interested in us and they're feeding off of our energy. And it's theorized that these shadow people could be negative manifestations of actual ghosts. So then there's the black mass shadow people. I think that's more along the lines of what you saw. They're said to be the general size of a human, but instead of being clearly defined or as clearly defined as a big black shadow can be, they're not so much humanoid form, but they appear more fuzzy or blurred. They can be like a human shape with a haze around them, or they can even morph into those black clouds like what you saw. But no matter how they appear, it's always very obvious that there's an actual entity there. It's been speculated that these black mass shadow people began as negative spirits that have over time lost their human identity completely. And as that happened, they started growing in power and evil. They're said to feed on negative emotion, general discord, and as they continue to shift, they lose more and more of that humanness completely and they shift towards being demonic. And then the most dangerous of all the forms are the demonic shadow people with red eyes. These guys should be avoided at all costs. They're among the few types of shadow people where the eyes can actually be seen. They're usually reported to have glowing red eyes, which is said to be particularly bad juju. And the descriptions given of these forms can vary widely, but a commonality is that they generally have a humanoid shape, but are often very, very tall, like floor to ceiling or bigger. And they can sometimes be said to have wings, horns, or super long fingers. Most people seeing them never mistake them as being a normal ghost, and they definitely give off a vibe of extreme evil or wanting to harm you. And these are the shadow people that are usually tied to a singular place. There's a couple other various forms of shadow people that have been all kinds of lumped into like a miscellaneous category. There's some that appear alien instead of evil or demonic. There's an old hag shadow person, and there are even animals such as dogs and cats.
But less is known about them.
There's so little known about shadow people that we don't have answers for why a particular entity might take a special interest in an individual or a family unit and decide to follow them around and torment them. With what I experience in our home now, I'd like to think that they just want to like integrate into our family and check out what we're doing because I haven't felt any particular bad vibes from them. But it's so jarring to peer out a doorway and see a head peeking around looking at you. Like no matter what the intentions are, no matter what you feel with it, it still scares the shit out of you. General consensus among paranormal experts is that they're around because they have an interest in the people they're observing, but it's also thought to be that they could be hanging around as guardian angels or protectors that are meant to watch over someone. There's even speculation that the shadow person that's silently lurking from around the corners could be your future self or a relative or child who doesn't yet exist in this timeline. I think I'm going to call bullshit on that last part because of the evil nature of some of the shadow people that can be exhibited. And it's opening up a whole nother can of worms, talking about why future and past self would want to come back and kill present self. And if that would even be possible, there's just too much with that. So in our research, we came across some how to get rid of shadow people and what do I do if they won't leave instructions, but I'm not going to address that here. I will say it again and again and again and again and again. If you're not well versed in dealing with paranormal, if you don't have access to the knowledge and wisdom that comes with dealing with these types of entities, and if you feel like you're dealing with a threatening or malevolent shadow person and not simply a watcher, could be an evil shadow person, could be a demon, don't fuck with it yourself.
Now, y'all have listened to our personal experiences. We have had a few listeners write in with some stories, and we chose 2 of our listeners to share their stories with us. Bethany wrote in, and she provided this story. In my childhood home in Clay County, Florida, we used to have a daybed in the living room. My brother and I would take turns staying up late watching TV and crashing in there. Every so often, I'd wake up in the dead of night and I'd be sitting straight up looking in the far right corner of the room, which also happened to be the entrance to the hallway. And we had a curtain there. But there'd be this floor-to-ceiling dark figure with a very clearly human shape to it. Head and shoulders mainly with no facial features. There's those no facial features again. I know it wasn't sleep paralysis because I could make myself lay down and cover my head. That's all my body would allow. Almost like me waking up interrupted whatever was happening. Years later, my brother and I were talking, and I started to tell him about the Shadow Man, and he stopped me and then proceeded to tell me the rest of my story. He had been experiencing it too the whole time. This has happened one time in my bedroom, but multiple in the living room. We had one friend ask us about it after staying the night around that time too.
Okay, Bethany, that sounds absolutely terrifying. And I hope you know that everything that you experienced was validated. I completely believe you.
We have another listener email from Abby.
And Abby's had some pretty terrifying experiences on her own. So we'll read that as well. In 2015, I was in high school and lived with my mom. My sister came to stay with us for a little while, but slept on the couch because we didn't have an open room. We had the living room separated from the hallway with a curtain. She tends to wear men's clothes and always wore oversized men's hoodies in the winter. One night I fell asleep on the couch and woke up randomly. There was someone holding the curtain open, standing in the doorway, and I assumed it was my sister because it was about her height and it looked like it had a big hoodie on. I apologized and told her I would move so she could go to sleep, and she said nothing and just walked down the hallway. Thinking she didn't hear me, I got up and followed, but when I opened the curtain, there was nobody there. I opened the door to my room, my mom's room, and the bathroom, looked in the kitchen, and out front, there was nobody there. After that night, we started seeing it more frequently and nicknamed the shadow Hoodie Man. I refer to him as he now that we named him. He gave off a very friendly vibe and loved to play with my dog. We would see him disappear under the bed and he would roll the ball for the dog back and forth. Aw, that's a nice shadow person. Separate story, not shadow people related, but same house. I had a nightmare one night where my mom was sleeping on the couch and I came out of my room to tell her something. I opened the curtain to the living room and there was a skinny, decrepit, very old man squatting like a frog on the arm of the sofa and just staring down at my mom. Ugh. He looked at me and his face looked angry and I screamed and woke up. I immediately ran to see my mom fully awake, folding clothes in her room, and told her about my nightmare. About 2 weeks later, she contacted a medium who spoke over the phone with her. I wasn't trusting it much because it was an over-the-phone medium, and it sounded like a scam to me, but I sat in the room to listen to what she had to say anyway. My mom gave her no details, but she said there were 2 entities in the house, both masculine, one friendly and one old spirit who was angry. Girl, when I tell you every bone in my body wanted to burn the house down and run away, I'm 100%. It was terrifying. Thankfully, we moved shortly afterwards for me to go to college anyway, but it was spooky as fuck. I also tend to avoid driving at night because I often see shadow people running across or beside the roads, and it freaks me out because I never get good vibes from them. I'm always afraid that they'll follow me home. This one is also not shadow people related. During college, we lived in another house about 2 hours away from our old place. It was a 5-bedroom house with 2 bedrooms downstairs and 3 bedrooms upstairs. There was an office between 2 of the bedrooms, and there was a balcony off the office. This was 2 stories up, no way up or down unless it was through the house. We always got a bad feeling when we were in the office, and my dogs wouldn't even go upstairs. One night, my mom and I were in our rooms upstairs. Neither of us could sleep. It was about 3 a.m., Tracy, 3 a.m., and we heard banging on the door, loud banging, like almost like someone trying to break the door down, but not from the front door. It was the office door to the balcony. My mom grabbed the bat and ran to the door, swinging it open, ready to mess the potential robber up. But there was nobody fucking there. Nobody. She ran downstairs to our backyard under the balcony that was 6 feet high with no gate. Again, had to go through the house to get to the yard. Nobody there. We were sketched out, but both went back to our rooms, and not 10 minutes later it happened again, only louder, coming from the same damn door. We grabbed a pillow and blanket and went to sleep downstairs that night. That is absolutely insane, Abby. I would love to hear more of your stories. I know you've got a lifetime of experiences. Please send us all of them. Shadow person related, alien related, whatever the case may be, send them all to us.
So literally 3 times now, at 3 different episodes, Tracy and I have tried to cover protection measures that you can take against shadow people and other entities. And every single time something has happened. Twice her phone has overheated and basically gave her the big fuck you. And then once we had an issue with our recording software. So we're recording this separately, but Tracy, can you give our listeners a couple tips and tricks on how they can protect themselves from some of these negative beings?
Since I do have experience with protection magic, I'll tell you guys that with the numerous events and visits that I've encountered and been met with, I do plan to take further action. I already do a daily mantra. I already do visualization. I use certain oils. I don't mess with herbs all that much just because I'm usually traveling. It's a little harder to do, but I have come across some really very old high magic rituals that I'll be implementing as well. I'll give a description here, but do not fuck with anything of this nature unless you understand protection, magic, and the measures that do need to be taken. I'm not going to be giving a full description or real detail, so don't decide to run with what I'm providing here in this shortened and abbreviated manner. Just don't do that, okay? I really do care about your safety. One of the big things that you can do is what they call seeking refuge, and that includes strengthening your spiritual self. Now, if you haven't already worked on elevating or evolving your soul, if you have not done any work on yourself as far as purifications or working hard with your will, this could take an extremely long time. I still have faith that you can do it, but if you've never really done any purification in your life and daily habits, just be prepared. It's no small task, and as just the research and implementation, it could take weeks to years depending. However, it will strengthen the efficacy of your recitations from the Quran that I'm going to provide here, and they need to be spoken in Arabic. So, Surah Bakarat, S-U-R-A-H, and Bakarat is B-A-K-A-R-A-H. Surah Bakarat. And this may seem really more easily said than done, but you need to be avoiding extreme emotions like anger or fear, allowing yourself to get real upset. Those types of emotions, they'll create holes in your auric field, and it'll make it easier for the jinn, the shadow people, entities, whatever you might come across. It makes them easier to enter you and to become a vampire to your energy. If anyone understands or knows even a little bit about Buddhism, one of the things that is taught in the very beginning is attachment. You don't want to maintain your attachment to anything. You don't want to maintain your attachment to pain, to fear. You don't even want to maintain your attachment to joy, because that could lead to disappointment. So what you need to do is to allow the emotions to flow through you and to leave. You don't want to hold on. You don't want to be frantically clinging to any emotion or any object or any person or anything. That's what the idea of attachment is all about. It's a part of life. We inevitably experience suffering, but we can't let it live and live within us, okay? Now, it's also said that the jinn specifically fear the word Allah. So reciting the words Ayatul Kursi. Remember the word and concept of Kur, K-U-R, the afterworld I mentioned earlier? That is supposed to be able to burn them into oblivion. Now, I have not ever tried that, so if I do take on that one, I will let y'all know how it goes. Now, Here's something that doesn't even seem like it would have anything to do with anything. But keeping your space clean and smelling good to your senses, using oils or flowers like jasmine, highly recommended. Okay? I like to use citrusy types of smells. I especially like frankincense and myrrh. Another interesting tactic that you can take is the jinn are also supposed to fear mirrors. So I'll be adding those to my spaces. And as a matter of fact, I've ordered a new pendant so that I can use this mirror pendant as another deflection and another form of protective magic. Again, I'm going to tell you, and I know I've probably really, really driven y'all crazy with saying this, make sure you protect yourself, especially if you're new to any sort of paranormal, magic, any of that, supernatural. Protect yourself.
Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us for this extra long episode. There is so much good information and content that it was really hard to cut it back from the 2.5 hours that we had actually recorded. We really hope that you guys enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed making it. We have a Patreon page. That's where we're going to post a lot of the links to some of the videos and references that we mentioned. We also have a Facebook page, Haunted Tea Podcast, where we have like more business type announcements. We have a Facebook group, Haunted Tea Podcast Ghostly Gossip, where you can join, you can talk to other listeners, you can tell your stories. Sometimes we'll pose questions and things like that in there, give you a little bit more on what's going on behind the scenes.
We will see you guys next week on Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Remember to check out all the resources, and I'll make sure to include those links.
And as always, please send us your stories, hauntedteapodcast@gmail.com. If you have suggestions for topics that you want us to cover, you can email those to us as well. And until then, we will see you next time. Stay spooky, y'all. Bye.